Welcome again. I'm going to continue with my scripts, putting a few in as we go through the PARAM tools. This one I'm actually going to talk a little bit about the plugins, very little bit about plugin Leopard and WeaverBird. But the reason I'm ending up going there is because I want to look at two nodes, and specifically the two nodes I want to look at are MeshFaces and PlanktonMesh. And for somebody that doesn't deal in meshes too often, ever since I left kind of Mesh Mixer and Blender and well, what else was I using? I guess it was Mesh Mixer. Left that for kind of Rhino and its mathematical curves and pretty cool ideas. We'll just jump into it and see where I get stuck and where I'm frustrated and what do I do. I don't have a lot of teachers in this. I'm in an institution that doesn't have a lot of, well, nobody that knows this medium. So I've had to learn most of it on my own in tutorials, which is how I think most learning happens now. We're going to go out of here for a second, and we're going to jump in here, and I'm going to show you when I come new to a script like a mesh quad or a mesh triangle, what I'll do is I'll extract all the information in it if the node is working. So thinking of, I want to get the mesh faces. I know a mesh quad and a mesh triangle end up with faces. So I extract and then I pop it in here and I look at what it is. And I see these aren't points. These are actually defining an order of how to make a mesh, how to build around the points or the vertices to actually structure. And I should say vertices, not points, because they can be shared from multiple faces. So once that's done, I've kind of jumped in there and I'm going to leave this little ungrouping as I can move along. And I've made my mesh face, my first ones. And in doing so, I look at what they are, and I'm like, what is Q, curly bracket? And it makes sense. That's a quad, and that's how you write out data to end up making a face. So that's different from points. And I realize, okay, there's a language there I have to know. This one's triangular, so that T must stand for triangular. And so I figured that out. And that's kind of how you have to think through this game. When I'm dealing with points, I grab some vertices here, and I'm not sure where I grabbed those from. I must have extracted them out of one of these things. Oh, out of here. Extracted it out of this construct mesh. And then I bring it into a panel and take a look at it. Once again, I extract the faces and I see what makes up those faces. Well, it's these quads. And I'm like, all right, I can get a handle of that. And then I can take that mesh and I can put it right back into deconstruct mesh, which is a tool I want to know. And there again are the faces. And I understand that's the data that has to go in for the vertices. That's the data that has to go in for the faces. Un, deux, trois, quatre. Or I should say 0, un, deux, trois. But here we go into normals. You end up with the same type of information that aren't vectors and aren't points. They're actually the sense of how you can actually draw out of here information. I end up getting a little stuck, but I end up working a bit in faces. Not something I'm too interested in doing, but what if I have a need for it? I need reference to it, and I need to understand it in context to other things. That brings me to a tool that's always bothered me, the PlanktonMesh. And I've looked online, and I'm like, who's plankton? What does this mean? It sounds like a fish to me. I don't know what it is. It sounds like something I'd eat. But what I do is I grab a bunch of rectangles because I look at what making a mesh is. And I'm like, well, I'll play on different sizes of rectangles as I bring them in. And I'll put them into a PlanktonMesh because I can make a PlanktonMesh work from a mesh. So there it is. There's a PlanktonMesh. I'm like, what does it do? I have two other nodes that they give me. They give me deconstruct plankton, they give me plankton from points. So I said, well, if they give me plankton from points, I'll just generate some points, and I'll match up the regions to that, and I'll say, well, what happens when I actually start looking at that? And I'm like, wait a second, that's some weird information that's coming through here. I've missed a few of these points. One's been shifted up here. This one's dancing over here. This one's dancing over here. And they must be my initial, they're including those initial points in the count of 5. So if I put on this one, all of a sudden the PlanktonMesh has that, but it also has those 3 points. If I take my 31 points, it's going to put them in and leave my 31 points. So I'm like, okay, I'm manipulating this mesh by adding other data. And I end up getting into that, and I'm like, what is that really meaning? Well, here are my points, and I can kind of understand those as I pull them out. I want to see what they are, and I'm like, okay, they dance around. Do they change at all? Well, they definitely change as I change the size of the region. But all other data coming out of here, vertices, outgoing half edge, this sounds like it's splitting, it's cutting things apart. It's like a regressive thing. I don't know, what do they call it? Let's go in and see what it is. You're actually decomposing things. So I'm like, well, I've never really thought of decomposing my sculpture, but all of my buildings rot and all my bronze corrodes and my iron rusts. Maybe this is good data, but this data stays consistent, at least in my eyes as I watch it, as I shift out. And I need a much bigger screen to do it. But as I plug in different regions, and what if I plug that region in and left that region? Well, that would make a totally different bird or animal. But the points change, but I'm finding this data kind of stays the same. At that point, I'm starting to get a little frustrated. Not really. I'm figuring out, but I don't know what to do with it. I can't wrap my head around it. I looked into Plankton, and up comes a 2009 thing called Leopard. And I'm like, I've never heard that used, and what's in there? So I end up grabbing my mesh, and I grab my Plankton mesh and put it in. And all of a sudden, I'm faced with these lines. I'm faced, if I take that off, or I think if I leave that on, I can see the faces, the select mesh faces. I'm like, what's going on there? I can select the points, but it's starting to become some chaotic geometry that I say, okay, it's trying to draw it between the points that are in my count. So if I go to 10, maybe that'll change it. Nothing seems to be changing. It's holding the same screwy pattern. I don't like that pattern. I'm getting frustrated with it. But in looking at it, I found they had a Catmull-Clark subdivision, and that rings a bell because WeaverBird seems to be the program they've pushed mostly. And so I'm like, well, I'll just bring in a mesh. I'll put it into a PlanktonMesh. I'll say, well, let's look at those lines. And if you can't see the lines, you're going to want to go into display down here and preview mesh edges. And then you'll be able to see things. And I'm like, subdivide it. And boom, that makes sense. I'm watching myself and I'm like, that's familiar with what I've done in subdivisions. You can see it starts to slow down the script quite a bit, and I shouldn't be messing with it too much. And so there I have the leopard edges, I have the leopard's faces, and I have the leopard points. And that rings a bell, and then I get into leopard dual mesh, and I'm like, I don't really notice a difference, but in the data, how come my mesh went from 182 to 200 faces to 202 vertices and 220 faces? And then I just am like, forget it. I remember WeaverBird. I remember Catmull-Clark over here. I remember what that did, and some great tutorials online. And even though I'm left with not a lot of information in Leopard and Plankton, I'm starting to think, maybe it's something a little dated. Maybe it's something specific for somebody. I don't know how much I'm going to use it, but I'm going to force myself right back into here. And what I'll do is I'll grab that, put it in a group, and give myself that wonderful Wickerson color blue that makes me happy. And I'll be like, that's my answer. I'm going to take off this group. I'm going to be like, that's what I'm going to do. And I'm going to leave the rest of that because I'm messy, because that's my key that makes me happy. And another thing I was doing was watching my number count, and I never seemed to be able to change that with the PlanktonMesh as I moved into other things. The vertice points always came up 121. So that was something that kind of confused me. So what I would do is I would take this and say, that's cool. I would take this and be like, honestly, Michael, I don't know what to do with it. It's kind of a mystery to me. I'll keep my ear out for more videos. I'm not going to kill myself trying to understand it, but I don't want to let any nodes slip by. So I'm going to put a little warning yellow on there and say, okay, I'm okay with the dealing with mesh faces, I think. Kind of got my head around there and what I could possibly think about doing. I'll put that into a color blue for myself. And this is just the way I think. Maybe other people have different ways. But be creative. Realize the hand of the artist and the drawings being made are here. This is as much artistic, in my opinion, as some of these geometries that are coming out of over here. And even though there's nothing too interesting over here, that's pretty structured for me. I have composed this, and I think there is some information here that's worth taking the print and sharing and having ideas with artists, designers, engineers, and architects. That's 8 minutes of that, and like I said, I didn't want to slip by anything. I've talked to other people. I can't wait to get back into something I understand. Twitch and Box is a little tricky. I like it, but Fields I understand because I've watched some tutorials, and I think I'll be okay through all of these things. And as I get into geometry cache, it's making a little sense. Pipeline's going to be confusing. What's my pipeline of operations? I don't use those terms in Sculpture a lot. Grouping, okay, and transforming, I shouldn't have a trouble with that in putting transformations away into parameters. So I think we'll make it through here. And then believe me, we've only made it in a sense of geometries to here. We haven't even jumped into the primitives, which the primitives, I understand quite a few, all the way to the KUKA commands. And I'm going to enjoy that in the GUID, which I learned from Carl Singline. I'm going to have fun with that. And like I said, I don't want to go too fast. I am interested in things that stand out, like the data path, certainly file paths I've used, shaders I've used. Like, at least know these words exist. You start to become accustomed to matrices. I've learned a little more. That's exciting. Like I said, I can't wait to bring in some GUIDs and identifiers. And I'm okay on domains. Cultures kind of throws me for a loop. But there are some really cool stuff. Like, even in the sense as we get down here and go into inputs, I've gone so far as to import protein databases from online sources to get a bunch of data to build geometries. And I've done that in another demo. So please just don't go too fast. Don't jump to these transformations and these intersections and deal in booleans and think that you've got like balloons and boxes and cubes and wood in front of you. go deeper into the math, go into the attributes of what makes a solid, what makes a surface, what makes a line, a point, a plane, a vector. Disappear into that and into data, and then hopefully you'll even go so far as to wrap your head around, like I said, these nodes that they've done so many wonderful examples on, C#, Python, and VB script, Visual Basic Script. Anyway, that's me talking and rambling. I am excited about this. I really do enjoy it. Hopefully we can make some pretty cool geometries. Nothing too exciting here, but wrap your head around things for the first time. Go deeper into them. You will be the creative person that decides where this can go, and you might ask the questions that no engineer or architect would ask or programmer, because you don't know it can't be done. And so, like I said, the path of an idiot, planned can be as good as a genius who has no plan. So put yourself somewhere between that and a range of what you do. Thanks for watching.